So I think we will begin. Kate Grand, are you with us? We had your picture just now, but you seem to have...
I am with you.
Yeah,
yes,
okay.
I'm just finishing my dinner.
Okay. Oh, you can share with the rest of us if you wish. And Ruth, Ruth Shepherd, are you with us? Hello, Ruth. Okay, not a lot we can do about that, but we may pick up a few other folk along the way. So welcome everyone to this question and answer session this evening, the second one in which we'll be focusing on the Synod review report in the Book of Reports. As I say, this is the second of these meetings. There was one the week before last. Just before we go any further, can I ask those of you that weren't involved in that first meeting, have you had the opportunity to listen to it?
No, I'm afraid not myself.
Okay, so maybe one or two who haven't, but most who are here, as it were, for the first time, have had the opportunity to listen to that first gathering. Before we begin with a prayer, can I ask you to note what Leo has said on the chat screen? If you can't access that, I'll just read it out for you. First of all, just for you to note that this meeting is being recorded, so it too can go alongside the first meeting and be viewed and listened to by folk who can't be here this evening. Secondly, if during the meeting you wish to speak, please raise your hand either like this or by using the hand facility which comes under or on the reactions button, so that hopefully we can identify you. Thirdly, when you speak, it would be very helpful if you'd say who you are and which church you are representing. And fourthly, it would be helpful to us all if, when you're not speaking, you would mute yourself, and of course unmute yourself when you do speak. Otherwise we can't hear you. I'd also just mention to you that there are, at least on my computer, there are enough folk, indeed 26 people, with us this evening, and that means that, at least on my computer, you're on two screens. I'm hoping that Leo will help in identifying folk who I can't see if and when they wish to speak. But if you do put your hand up and it's obvious that Leo or I have not seen you, then say something or make it obvious that you're being ignored, but you won't be being ignored on purpose. Is that okay? Let's begin by sharing in prayer together. Let us pray. Gracious God, you call us to be leaders within your church. Among the responsibilities you give to us, we are to discern together, under the leading of your Spirit, the best ways in which we can serve you and engage in your mission. And you charge us to organise our affairs in order that we can respond to your call to be effective missional disciples. Remind us of your promise to equip us with the gifts and the resources we need to serve you well. Help us to have confidence in your promise and to use the gifts and resources you provide wisely and helpfully. Give us your grace this evening and at all times, that in our discussions we may discern and respond to your call, that in our thinking and our listening and our speaking we may be kind and gracious and open to you speaking to us through others. And Lord God, bind us together and bless us, and help us at all times to have concern for those whose needs are greatest in the church, in our communities, in our world. As we offer ourselves and the lives of your churches in sacrificial service, following the example of Jesus, in whose name we offer our prayers and spend our time together this evening. Amen. I'm going to begin with several questions which have been raised since the first meeting that we had by Kate Grand, who is with us this evening, having, I think, finished her dinner. Kate was unable to be with us on the first occasion, but she's here this evening. She has listened to the recording of the first meeting, and arising from that, she's got several questions which she would like to pose. And from what she sent me, I've formed three questions which I'll put initially to Mike Hart. Mike Hart is presenting the report on the Synod review to the Synod meeting, and therefore is our kind of principal respondent to the questions this evening. And others may chip in, Marin in particular, with in answering the questions. But the first question Kate asks is, would it be possible for members of the Synod meeting to see Mel Campbell's report? That's the report on which the report to the Synod meeting and the accompanying resolution is based. So, Mike.
There is no report as such from Mel. What Mel did was present to Synod Executive the feedback. So we'll have a look and discuss within Synod Executive about how best to respond to that. It's not a simple answer of there being a report we can dust down. It was a presentation that was given to Mel by Mel to Synod Executive that formed the feedback from the work she'd done with us. We'll have a look at what's sensible and helpful, but there is not a report that can simply be shared.
Thank you, Mike. Kate or anyone else, do you wish to ask a supplementary to Mike on that matter? Okay, we'll move on then to another question from Kate. She says, do we really need congregations and ministries advisors between the churches and the congregations and ministries committee? with the new missional partnerships, there are already a lot of meetings, more than we envisaged before COVID-19 and with the advent of Zoom. Direct communication is likely to be clearer if needed, and solutions to many things can be found within the partnerships as we grow together. We are seeing already the benefit of sharing ideas on Zoom. The missional partnerships should be at the heart of all that the Synod is doing. So to go back to the main question, Kate asks, do we really need congregations and ministries advisors between the churches and the Congregations and Ministries Committee? Mike.
One of the things that Synod Executive have wrestled with, and it's an issue that is common to particularly to the larger synods within the United Reformed Church, is how best to make sure there is a strong connection between the synod and its local churches, and how that is best managed. One of the concerns of the Synod Executive about our current arrangements is as you've rightly referred to, the way in which it ties up resources in meetings as opposed to in direct conversations. And that was why Executive were attracted to the idea, which is, I think they're called pastoral advisors or pastoral links in some of the other larger synods, where there is a person who has that relationship with a group of churches on behalf of the synod and is able to work with them and maintain that connection. And clearly that's a concept that's in use in other synods. What Executive were very conscious of was that it was something that would need to be thought through in our context, particularly to make sure it worked effectively with missional partnerships, not against them. And that was part of the reason why that area of the review has not progressed as far as others, because very clearly this is something, and very much this is the starting point of that. Executive wanted to consult with local churches about that approach and how you felt that would work in the context in which you are. And clearly the idea is that this is the starting point, and that consultation would happen over the winter months with a view to coming back with a much more fully formed proposal to the March Synod. I don't know whether one of my colleagues from Executive wants to elaborate a bit more on the experience elsewhere of pastoral advisors. It's not something I really have much experience of.
Let me respond to Mike's question about what these kinds of people do in other parts of the United Reformed Church. I mean, my knowledge on this isn't extensive, but I am aware that that some of the synods do have folk operating within them who fulfill, I think, different kinds of functions depending on the particular synod and the way that synod works. I'm aware that in at least one synod, and I think this is common to a number of others as well, a number of synods have identified particular ministers who keep an eye on or develop a relationship with a number of churches in a particular area of the synod, and develop a relationship, build up knowledge about them, and are able to share that knowledge as appropriate within the synod structure, either within the pastoral committee or a trust meeting or whatever. But that's one way of operating, and sometimes these folk work closely with the synod moderator in pastoral concern and dealing with particular difficult issues that might arise within a local setting. So that's
Right.
one kind of model, which I think folk operating that kind of way are often called pastoral advisors in these other places.
Right.
I'm aware that other synods operate on a kind of different way, much in the way that several of our pastoral committees, area pastoral committees, operate at the moment, in that several of our pastoral committees have an individual or a number of individuals who sit on the area pastoral committee who maintain contact with local churches, and not in the deep way that or the deeper way that I've just described as happens with pastoral advisors in other synods. But in other synods, there are folk who operate much in the way that some folk operate within our existing synod area pastoral committees, in that they keep in touch with local churches. They find out on a fairly regular basis, for example, from the church secretary of the churches that they're keeping an eye on what's going on, if there are any particular issues, and if there are matters to report, then they will share those with the appropriate people and within the area pastoral committee. So those are two kind of models of pastoral advisor, pastoral support, call the animal what you will. They're different, but they operate in a number of other synods in these different ways. And as Mike has indicated, if we were to, if we pursue the proposal, then we will need to tease out how it would be most helpful and effective for us to work on that kind of a basis within this synod.
Brian, Brian, could I just say that
This is Martin Coe.
I'm Martin Coe. Sorry, I'm convener in Cumbria, and at least a part of what I do already encompasses some of the things I think we envisage with this. We've had a number. I mean, obviously, we've had 12 years of area presidents, and since Sarah left last year, Brian and I have reconfigured some of how that works, and Brian's engaging with some of the ecumenical stuff. But in terms of this particular tasking, there's something there that's more than just saying, as perhaps not just saying, as sometimes we do when we're conveners of committees, thanks for that piece of information, I'll take it to the next committee, rather than I'll act on it, I'll get some further information and come back to you. I know somewhere else that's doing that. There is something that is right about us networking across the partnership and supporting one another, but it's also helpful at times to have a clear role that actually says, I'm not just interfering and I'm not just distracting myself from other work I might be doing, because actually this is work that I should be doing, whether that's coming alongside my URC colleagues in the time that we've had now, because if you don't have somebody who thinks it's their task to gather people together, everybody thinks gathering together should happen, but nobody gets round to doing it. And one example of a particular piece of work would be one of our United churches, looked after by minister of another denomination, perfectly well. There's no criticism of the leadership, except for when they come to dealing with specifically URC-ish things, like the fact that their building is held by our trust. So they actually don't, as a leader and as a congregation who have a good number of people from other traditions, have a grip on who they might get hold of at the Synod office. So I've been able to get alongside with no criticism intended of that other minister, because it's my task. So it's not like going, help, I'm out of my depth, I need the lifeguard. It's actually simply somebody comes alongside and says, well, look, I can sit into some of your meetings, help guide you with the information that you don't have, in a way that perhaps some conveners of pastoral committees do, perhaps some don't, but with a definite intent that that's what's supposed to happen, not just crikey, there's a problem here. So those sorts of things, keeping in touch with people that perhaps in some places do happen. I can see this as a good way of ensuring somebody thinks it's their task to make sure the networking stuff happens. Some of the partnerships will be better at that than others, I know, and some pastoral committees are better than that than others. And sometimes it depends on the personalities involved. But if it's a tasking, something you've taken on, agreed to do, you know you need to do it, which is different than thinking somebody ought to do this thing. So it's a friendly but firm, and I know who, and I can get hold of the folk in the office and say, Mike, quite often it's Mike, can you just give me this information, or could you be in touch with these people, because it's more than I know. So I hope that helps a little bit of how I see some of this work.
Thank you, Martin. I'm going to go back to Kate Grand and ask her if you've got any particular response or further question that you'd like to raise in the light of what's been said on this question. Don't worry if you haven't, but there's an opportunity now if you do.
Yeah, I can see that being useful in where you have multi-denominational pastorates, or even mission partnerships. But I think a lot of the time, within the mission partnership, you know, we could go straight to Mike or whatever with a question of that sort, you know, without having to go all around the houses and wait for somebody to get back.
Okay, thank you.
Sheila Coop has a question, Brian.
Thank you. Sheila, where are you? Can't see you.
I'm here. Is that right next to you, according to my screen?
Carry on, Sheila.
My question is this not a role that should be picked up by the missional partnership as a whole, insofar as if a church is in need of additional assistance or advice, that they would discuss that with the partnership, somebody would then be in a position to take that forward and ask the questions. I'm not sure that it needs a special role. I think that is one of the primary advantages of having a group of people in a small local area who will know some of the problems anyway and will possibly be even anticipating some of the problems.
Yeah. Thank you, Sheila.
Brian?
Okay, Mike. Sorry, Mike. I was looking on the other screen. So.
It's all right. I was going to say something very similar to what Sheila has just said, but it sounds like some of what is proposed for this role is the kind of thing that missional partnership steering group conveners are already doing. And I can see the need, perhaps, for there to be a designated person who's the hub to draw information from. But in terms of there being a relationship back to the synod structures, as it were, I don't think that's best served by it being a third party. That should just be a direct link from the missional partnership steering group to the relevant people in synod. I don't quite understand the the need for a carrier pigeon between the two.
Okay, thank you. Good. Anybody else on this?
Yeah, me, Brian.
Graham-
Graham, Hope and Denton,
Graham-
and
Yeah, Graham,
Oldham and Tateshead.
and then Christopher after you, Graham. Just to note that I've seen Christopher's hand. So
The-
Graham,
the-
carry on.
I am not the most tactful person, I apologise. As our Synod Pastoral Committee rep is our missional partnership rep, there is, to my perception, wrongly or otherwise, a conflict of interest as to this missional partnership's drive, aim, purpose, whatever you want to call it, and the synods, because we are filtered, without meaning anything nasty to Marion at all. There is a filter in there in the fact that Marion is not independent of this missional partnership, nor is she independent of Synod, because she's actually part of Synod. And that's been a little bugbear off and on for a little while. And as I say, I apologise if I have not worded that as carefully as I should have done.
Okay, thank you, Graham. I think we get the drift of what you're saying. And I would, if I may, simply comment that I think that that what we're exploring here is a means by which we can make a more fluid and satisfactory arrangement than we have at the moment. Would that be fair, Mike, Marion? Okay, thank you.
Can I also mention, though, sorry, Brian, can I also mention I volunteered to help coordinate a partnership outside my area as requested, and it was never taken up or explored. So, yeah, it's within the same ballpark framework.
Okay, thank you.
I think, Brian, one of the problems we always face is that some of us think there are too many meetings, and then when we try and trim them back, some of us feel that there aren't enough meetings to know what's going on with, and it's hitting that right way of communicating, sharing, and not overloading individuals nor having cutouts that we're trying to do by doing more of a fluid networky feel to some of the work that we do, rather than, as Mike suggested, a cutout, but actually or carrier pigeon between the two, but actually a way of having conversation rather than authority, I suppose. And so that sort of tear down management that isn't always helpful in the church.
Thanks, Martin.
Our Synod exec are managers.
Sorry, was that a question or a statement, Kate?
Well, it makes it sound like as though they are our managers, and I don't think they are. They're there to help.
We're all servants of one another at every committee.
But everything seems very top down and not enough bottom up.
Well, I think what Mike Hart said about that making a change in principle to structures so that we can begin to have conversations and consultation. That's about the kind of the bottom up, as you put it. I don't like this up down kind of thing, but we do want to be in conversations, but we needed a conversation starter. And in some ways, what's written in the book of reports is intended to be that, but also, as Brian said, to make things more fluid and more conversational as we go forward, so that we're not filtering everything through layers of committees, but trying more to network. We have to have some committee structures because of legalities and being, subject to charity law. But in other areas, we can work in a more relational way. And I think that's what we're trying to achieve, so that we get the feeling of all being together as a synod and not any sense of us and them.
And I mean, I hope that for example, these meetings, one of which we're involved in now, is a step in the right direction in that better communication and more fluid conversation between us all. I'm going to ask, Christopher's been waiting patiently. Christopher, the floor's yours.
Yeah, what concerns me in reading these proposed structures is quite where the partnerships and their steering groups fit in. And other people, Mike and Sheila, have quite rightly pointed out that now the partnerships are developing, the churches feel embedded and belonging to their partnerships much more than they were initially. And so they see working alongside their fellow churches together as being where they get a lot of their support and where they share their information. Now, my concern probably in what I'm hearing and what I read in the reports is that I can see a direction of communication which largely comes from these committees to the steering groups and to the churches. What I'm not seeing is the way in which communication could be as equally facilitated going upwards. I would like to really know how a church contacts Synod and its committees. I can see how the committees and Synod contact the church, but I'm not certain it's as easy or as clear the other way around.
Okay, thank you, Christopher. I'll ask Mike to respond to that particular point.
The first point is just on the number of people have raised it about missional partnerships. When the Synod meeting a few years ago agreed to establish these, the steering groups were seen to have very limited decision-making and formal powers to enable them to develop and become network enablers and supportive groups. Different steering groups and different partnerships have developed at different paces, but the proposals are reflective of that position that the Synod meeting agreed, that these wouldn't be part of any formal, synod structure and the like. In terms of communication, part of the purpose of what we're trying to do is to simplify and streamline the communication both ways. The principles that are set out in paragraphs 15 and particularly paragraph 60 emphasize that the most important driver of this is to enable a clearer understanding and a more supportive and particularly responsive approach to the needs of local churches and the issues facing local churches, and whatever is agreed following consultation around. If we go with congregation ministers advisors, if we develop something in a different form, more explicitly linked to missional partnership, the acid test of it is not simply how it communicates downwards, but how it enables us to respond more effectively to bottom-up communication. I have to say, judging from the volume of emails my inbox receives from church treasurers in particular in local churches, I think they have a pretty good idea how to contact Synod directly already.
Thank you, Mike. I've just a note that I've seen Lee's hand. I'll just come back to you later in a minute, but I just want to make sure, first of all, from Christopher, have you got any response to make to what Mike has said, Christopher?
I think I would ask you perhaps to re-examine how the steering groups are operating in actuality, as opposed to perhaps what it was initially thought, because I think it's difficult for a group of churches to work as a partnership without some sort of overarching guidance and structure, which they are mutually giving to one another, but somehow you have to have a point of entry into that partnership, I believe.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to respond to this particular matter?
Yes.
Hang on, just hang on, Mike. I've seen you. Lee, were you coming in on this matter or something different?
Well, I guess it was kind of part of the conversation.
Okay, carry on.
And I might be oversimplifying things, but surely it's about communication. And so I think, like Mike said, do we need, surely the ministers and the synod and maybe the steering group reps just need to have a conversation once every couple of months or whenever, just like this, like we do in our steering group, and replicate, I guess, the same thing with synod, where it is just a kind of conversation. It does feel like this is kind of making a maze out of what should be a straightforward communication. Or that's how it feels to me. I may well be very oversimplifying this, but it just feels like we're trying to communicate, to find more ways to communicate when actually we could just talk.
Thank you, Lee. Just as a kind of reflection back as to what I'm hearing, and I'm not suggesting that everybody on the screen is agreeable to this, but what I'm hearing from many of those who've spoken is that there's a question mark over whether we need the Congregation and Churches advisors, and we ought perhaps to be looking more closely at other ways of communicating between local churches and or missional partnerships and the new Congregations and Churches Committee. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Mike, is your hand still up, or have you put it down in response to what I've said?
No, it's still up a little bit.
Okay, just before you start, let me say I've noted Marilyn's hand, so you don't have to keep it in the air, Marilyn, but Mike first. Mike Walsh.
I agree with your summary, Brian, and that's helpful. That if that's what's been heard, and that sounds like we're moving in a positive direction. I think it may be fair enough for Mike to say that the partnerships were envisaged as something slightly differently and less formal to begin with. But if I've heard this meeting correctly and the earlier meeting correctly, lots of people from partnerships are saying we've moved beyond that now, and we need to integrate the partnerships into the structure in some way. Now, I don't by any stretch mean that partnerships become mini area pastoral committees and have all those responsibilities. That's the last thing in the world I'm advocating. But the problem I'm still having with what I'm hearing is that inadvertently, I think, and I genuinely think it is inadvertently, that we're inventing systems for communication to take place between officers and partnerships, but the decision-making buck stops here now seems to reside entirely with synod committees and officers once area pastoral committees are removed, and partnerships are asked for their opinion, and no matter how well that's done, that they're still not being given decision-making authority. That's where my concern still lies. And if decisions can be taken as close to local as possible, then they should be. That should be a principle that overarches all of this.
Thank you, Mike. Before Marilyn comes in, I'm going to give Mike Hart the opportunity to comment on what's been said so far.
I think I'd want to re-emphasise something I said, I think, in response to a similar point at the last Q&A, that it's incredibly helpful to have the views coming back from a local level, that actually you feel more confident to be able to use the missional partnership steering groups in that way now. And you know, clearly that's something that that Synod Executive in its discussions about the feedback will pick up. It's something we're happy to respond to and look at how it best works. We certainly, you know, don't want to create another layer of bureaucracy if we don't need to.
Thank you, Mike. Marilyn Piper.
Can you? Yeah. One word: communication. I submitted 4 paragraphs to Mike and to Brian about the last meeting, which I did attend, and it was on communication. Part of it was to see if it was paid any attention whatsoever. So far, I haven't been told any of it. Can I quote to you my paragraph 3? By number of members, the local church meeting is by far the largest council of the URC, but it is the one with the least influence because of lack of consultation and communication with its members. This needs to change if we are to improve the them and the us situation. What percentage of our membership doesn't even know what Synod is because they're never consulted on anything? I can remember about 3 times in the last decade when we've put a direct question out to local church meetings to be discussed before something has already been decided. Could we have some comments on that, please?
Mike, Marion?
I mean, I've only been in Synod office for 2 years, but I was an elder in a local church and I can recall plenty of consultations on which Synod was consulting with the local church. Different churches will have taken different views about how they responded to that in terms of what was a discussion that the elders had and responded to what was a discussion for the church meeting. And you know, I think that's entirely a matter for the local church to make a decision about how it best wants to formulate its response. But I can certainly think of issues that option has certainly been available to the local church if it chose to take. I think the other thing, without wanting to get into a dialogue about this, we need to be clear that one of the responsibilities of the Synod rep is to represent what's going on in the Synod meeting back to their local church, as well as representing the local church to the Synod. So there is an obligation on all of us, you know, in this meeting today to share the business of Synod with our local churches. Some people do that incredibly effectively and raise that awareness. You know, in other churches it doesn't work as well. But that's the nature of life.
May I come back to that? I have been the Synod rep for many years for my church. I have taken things back from every single Synod and published them in our local magazine. It doesn't make people feel part of it. It just reports back on what has been already decided. We want to be consulted in the initial stages, not given a fait accompli.
Well, I'd say, Marilyn.
Marilyn, do you not think this is what we're doing? This is actually part of this. The plus of COVID is that we now have a much bigger extended opportunity with people who are not necessarily Synod reps able to join this conversation and help shape the thinking.
No, I would say definitely not, Martin. No, the number of people who join in these Zoom conversations is a minute percentage of our local churches.
So can I say, I echo what Mike has said. that we do have a responsibility, and that the book of reports is published ahead of the meeting. Now, that might not fall in with your church meetings, but there are things that can be ordinarily, not in COVID times, talked about over coffee. We can, when I was a synod rep, I tried to make sure that the book of reports was available to other people than myself early on. We have to enable people to feel a part of the whole. Just as some people don't engage with church meeting, some people don't want to engage with the synod meeting, and that saddens me. But it saddens me that at times, as a minister in pastoral charge, the person who has been the synod rep has not communicated effectively to the church meeting about potentially exciting things that are going on. And so then it feels as if people are disconnected, but we all have a responsibility for communication. I know it's difficult. I know sometimes in pressed agendas, the synod matters get squeezed at elders meetings and church meetings. But if we don't open the lines of communication and hopefully do more of this, then that divide will stay. And this is one of the things that the review is trying to work to break down, to make the local and the synod, in the sense of the geographical synod and the sense of the synod as a working body, more cohesive and better at communicating with one another. So I think, yes, I hear everything you're saying, Marilyn, but I think, also there's another side to that we've got to consider. And what can we do to make Synod more exciting? You say you've been a rep for a long time. That's admirable. But all of us who've been reps for a long time, I think, have a duty to bring people along with us as observers to see if they would like to take that role on. Otherwise, it becomes just a thing that is a specialism, rather than something that belongs to us all.
Can I go before you to respond to Marion?
Hang on, I think that
there is a point I need to make.
Hang on, Marilyn. Hang on, Marilyn. I just want to say I'm not wanting in any way to stifle conversation on this, but we have given it a fairly good whirl actually on this subject. I'm happy. I'm happy for you to respond, but just bear in mind that we've given this quite a lot of time already. I noticed that John Piper wanted to say something. So when you finish, Marilyn, if John would like to speak, and then I'd like to give opportunity, and I'm giving warning now, I want to give opportunity to anyone in our number this evening who hasn't spoken. I want to ask if anybody who hasn't spoken wishes to contribute to any part of our conversations this evening. So Marilyn first, then John, and then anyone else. Marilyn.
Yeah, my response to Marion was, if she recalls from her minutes, she will know that I suggested that as part of elders training in their period as a serving elder, everyone should go along to Synod with the Synod rep, thus including lots of people at Synod as part of their training, so that everybody went. It was ignored, like lots of ideas I've put forward are ignored, and we won't improve while we're ignoring our elders.
Okay, thank you, Marilyn. John.
Thanks, Brian. John Piper. I guess I need to confess to being an ex-Synod officer, because part of what I want to say is self-criticism. I think where Marilyn started, and as you well know, I don't always agree with Marilyn, but where Marilyn started was about the lack of involvement of local churches in the decision-making of the Synod. And I know in my time as Synod Treasurer, we did not do that very often. So the points that Mike and Marion have made about Synod reps and their responsibilities to communicate, absolutely spot on, but that's a different issue. The issue that I think Marilyn was touching on is that we at Synod, and as I say, this goes back a long time, it's not a recent thing, as Synod, we much less frequently than we used to, consult with our local churches and give them the opportunity to contribute to decision making.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, John. Is there anyone who hasn't spoken yet this evening who would like to offer us a question or comment? Pauline.
Yeah, it's Pauline from Hurstnook. I'm actually at the same church as John and Marilyn. Just an observation, to be honest. I do understand where Marilyn's coming from, and I also understand where the Synod officials are coming from. And Marilyn's taking pains. Certainly, I've been at presentations at our church. Marilyn's gone into great detail about trying to involve the wider congregation about Synod matters to sort of help inform them. But I do also think there's a sort of general, if I call it apathy, it might be the wrong word, but with missional partnerships, I can only count 2 or 3 people who are actually directly involved with that, and in spite of the amount of time we've tried to encourage other people to come on those meetings, but it is the same people that are coming forward. So, in spite of all our efforts from everyone, I do think there's still a lack of engagement or lack of desire or something, not wanting to have that responsibility, or they're just happy to go along as they are and be things to be explained to them, to be honest, want for better word. But that's just an observation from my perspective.
Thank you, Pauline. Is there anyone else who'd like to make a comment? I've seen you, Mike. I'm just wanting to see if there's anyone else who hasn't spoken who wants to chip in at this point. No. Mike Walsh.
Thanks, Brian. Not everyone will perhaps know that my role in the Synod is I'm a pioneer minister, working not with a congregation but with local people in a particular part of Manchester. And before that, I was a local church minister for 10 years in Heel Green Church. And since doing this pioneer role, my understanding and practice of ministry has hugely changed. And I think changed in a positive way. And why it's changed is because it's become much more about relationships and a lot less about structures. Because I'm not involved in structures much, and I am involved in talking to people, and more importantly, listening to people. And it's a completely new skill set that I've learned in these last 6 or 7 years. And at the beginning of my ministry, I would have sat down to consider a problem, drawn up a master plan, presented it to the elders, got their approval, and then taken it to a church meeting and sought the same. That was how I operated. That's how I understood the United Reformed Church operates. But since being part of this pioneer ministry, that has been hugely challenged and eroded and replaced with listening to people as the first point, as the first step, not drawing up a plan and then seeking approval for it. And so I just wanted to share that story as an experience of a very different ministry, and why I now can't but help come at problems like this from a completely different perspective. I'm not trying to be awkward or pull things apart for the sake of it in some of the comments I've made. But in some ways, I want to say that the URC did this to me. You now have to live with the consequences. But that's part of my role. I think I'm now meant to bring these different perspectives to these kind of discussions. So I'll carry on doing that. In that light, what I've been doing the last few weeks is talking to people. A lot of people on this screen, if you want to wave, have been the people I've been chatting with, and more besides. And there's something I want to say to the Synod exec and the Synod officers that may be a little hard to hear, but I want to say it in genuine love and friendship of we're all heading for the same goals. A repeated thing that's come up in all my conversations has been when district councils were dissolved, we had a consultation that said, do you want bigger local groupings or smaller local groupings? And overwhelmingly, the churches responded smaller. And the result of that was we were then split into the 4 areas, which were massively bigger than the district councils we had before. And the number of people I've spoken to in the last couple of weeks where that's been what they've referred to. And I just want to say to the Synod officers, that was 20 odd years ago. And it's ingrained in the culture of what people have remembered, that it doesn't really matter what we say. The centre does what it wants at the end of the day. And that is the unsaid feeling that's been behind our conversations, I think. And so I just want to offer that in as gentle a way as I can to the Synod officers. Amongst the churches, there's a feeling of the centre are reviewing what the centre does. So how will it come up with something genuinely different if it doesn't involve the local in more than just a question and answer, but in a let's get together and decide who we want to be as a synod, how we want to relate to each other, which is a bigger question than how do we want to shuffle our structures this time. Does that make sense to anybody?
Thank you, Mike. Mike Hart, Marion, do you wish to respond?
Well, I could simply say that as I wasn't in this synod, never mind a synod officer 20 years ago, I don't feel bound by you know, that thinking doesn't scar me. But I've, like, you know, my experiences from outside the church, my experience is based on exactly what Mike says about relationships. And I do see what we're trying to do as being about creating a different approach to relationships. That's why, if you think about it, all the discussions we've had in both of these meetings have been about how does that interface work better. That's why in the proposals that the Synod Executive have offered to the Synod meeting, it's been very clear that what we're suggesting in terms of that relationship is a starter. It's designed to put something on paper that we think is sensible, but is not fully formed and needs to be shaped and influenced by conversations and people's responses. The paper is very clear about the intention to consult over the next few months in shaping and finalising what comes out. As others have said, this is very much a first part of that, to try and test that something we think might work is worth a wider consultation. But that's the principle, that's the spirit in which it's been offered. Certainly, you know, that's been discussion. This isn't, we know this is not fully formed. We know it needs to be influenced so that it works for local churches, for missional partnerships. And that's why a lot of the discussions and the contributions we've had over these 2 Q&As are incredibly helpful in terms of moving us forward into something that can sensibly be discussed in wider forums.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
Yeah. Can I just say that it doesn't come over like that in the way it's actually written up, because it mentions this, but it makes it look as though we rubbish stamp it at the meeting, and then you go away and put it all together and bring it all back, and it's all cut and dried. That's the way I read it this afternoon, and it was the third or fourth time through it.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Mike, anything further or not? I'm not.
Which Mike?
I think I was talking to Mike Hart actually. Sorry, I didn't. We've got a lot of mics around. Okay. Look, we're at 8 o'clock. I'm going to draw this to a close now. We've given it an hour. I think we've had an hour of very helpful conversation. You can be assured that comments that you have made alongside comments that others have made have been, as you know, recorded, have been noted. Our clerks here with us, Tim, and there is, for your information, a meeting of the Synod Executive next Monday, which will, amongst other things, review these question and answer sessions that have been held over the last 3 weeks, and we'll consider how we might proceed as we come to the Synod meeting a week on Saturday. It may be, I don't know, we'll have to wait and see. It may be that the executive will suggest some tweaking of or amendment to the resolution that it's put on this subject in the Book of Reports. I'm not able to foresee what the executive will wish to do on that point, but I can assure you that that the conversations that we've had have been heard and will be reflected upon further. There is one final question and answer session which takes place on Friday evening of this week, and that question and answer session is on other reports in the Book of Reports. That's other than the Synod Review and other than the finance report. So there's opportunity, if you weren't able to attend the first meeting on other reports, for you to participate in the meeting on Friday evening, 7 o'clock, the same Zoom link as for this meeting. So thanks to everyone for sharing this evening. Maybe see you on Friday. If not, no doubt we look forward to being together on the morning of the 14th, it is, isn't it, of November, Saturday the 14th of November. So thanks for showing up tonight, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.